They are developing a trust fund to fund other worker-controlled companies around the country. If you go in, this is how humane this company is. If you go in on a Thursday at 3:30 in the afternoon, everybody's working, the clients are all around, and a voice comes over the PA system, a woman's voice. She says, okay, everybody, you know it's 3:30 in the afternoon. You know what that means. It's time to put down your work like we've agreed and take out your bingo cards. And that's just what they do. All of a sudden, 3:30, work stops, no matter what's happening, no matter who the client is. Everybody takes out their bingo cards, and for a half hour, it's B9, I-35, and they play out the company profits. It's no big deal, but it's just a little humanizing effort at the workplace. Once a month, they take a senior employee, one of the folks who's been there the longest, who's an older person, and in the company auditorium, they throw a kind of, this is your life. You know, they surprise the person. You know, they bring her in. Here's Mary Jones. She walks in. There are 350 employees. They've brought in her former school teacher, you know, Bertha from Atlanta, and her brother is flown in from Boston. And they all get together, and it's no big deal, but it just shows they care about each other, that it's more than a company, that it's a classroom, that it's a family, that it's a real community of interest there. Now, of course, that's one company with 350 people. There's a bicycle factory that, in fact, we are consulting right now on how to move to democratization, that operates in New York State, that has about 500 employees. It will soon be a democratically controlled firm. There's an asbestos mine in Vermont. There's some plywood factories out in the Pacific Northwest. There are experiments all over. A massive food co-op in Berkeley with stores all over the Bay Area. We're never going to fully democratize the country, of course, unless there's a political movement. And that's up to people like yourselves, whether there is going to be that kind of movement emerge in the years ahead in this country. I think it has to be a massive movement, a revolutionary movement, but not necessarily a violent one. A movement that's in the streets, that's involved with demonstrations and sit-ins and boycotts and pickets and all the traditional tools and methods of organizing that have been used by every great movement in this society's history. The trade unions, there's a movement within them. If you pick up, it's either Time or Newsweek this week, you'll read about Ed Sedlowski, who's running for the presidency of the United Steelworkers as a rank-and-file insurgent. I think there's as I travel around the country, I sense a whole new sort of militancy and rank-and-file movement against the old labor bosses within the trade unions. There needs to be that kind of organizing going on right here on campus around all kinds of economic issues that relate to this campus, from corporate recruiters who come on campus. Instead of just accepting jobs from them, beginning to dialogue with them, informing students about what kind of roles they're moving into in America's corporations. There has to be a massive educational campaign in this society to offset these free enterprise courses and all this corporate advertising and all the other brainwashing that's going on in America. It's eventually got to move into electoral strategies. It's got to go into the state legislatures, into Congress, and I think all of that is possible. It's all happened before in this society, and it can happen again. The mechanisms for the change exist right now. Some of them need to be developed. It's not that big a deal. Setting up state banks, setting up funding mechanisms to begin to buy out the assets or to take over the assets of major corporations today. Cities taking over plants and factories that have been deserted by multinational corporations that move abroad, municipalizing those companies and leasing them out to workers to self-manage themselves. State developmental agencies. There are $100 billion in union pension funds in this society that right now are just invested mostly in multinational corporations. But if a movement develops, could be channeled into funding democratic workplaces throughout the country. So that's a challenge. It's not just an interesting option. I think it's got to happen. The Chase Manhattan Bank says, not for the same reasons I've outlined, but that within the next 10 years, by 1984, there will be in America, if things continue in this economic system on the track they're on in terms of the foreign investment overseas and all the rest, by 1984 there will be an unemployment rate in America of 17%. Now during the Great Depression it was around 25–30%. Chase Manhattan Bank is saying 17%. There are other things in the works that are just as devastating economically. And it's up to all of us here and Americans all over the country to decide that that's not going to happen and to take responsibility for where this country's going and stop fooling ourselves that, you know, we can all just go to school and that we can all do whatever we're doing and that we'll move into our companies and we'll have families and a good life. This country is headed right down the tubes. I think most of us sense it, and there's nothing that's going to save it except us. There's not going to be a white knight to come along. There's not going to be, some religious movement that's going to come save us and take us all to the promised land. Although I've got a lot of friends that are off chanting in the woods places, hoping that, the final impasse of civilization will come and they'll all be taken up to heaven. I don't think that's going to happen. It's all up to us to take responsibility, to realize that the only reason that institutions we don't like are in power is because you and I allow them to be in power. Big business isn't holding a gun at our head. It simply has our allegiance and our loyalty. If we begin to decide that we don't want it to be that way and dedicate our lives to activism, to working for that kind of change, it's not going to be that way anymore. And the corporations themselves understand that, and they're afraid of it. I'd like to close by just reading a passage from the Declaration of Independence. This is the document, again, that was so subversive to our government employees. And just think about these words. I know you've read them before, but just think about these, because these are the words that founded this nation. This is what 1976 is supposed to be all about. This is what America stands for. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. That's not a passage that deals, to my mind, just with political government. It deals with any governing institution that rules our lives. That's our birthright. It's time for us to act on it, and it's time for us to remember the words of Ben Rush, a great patriot 200 years ago, who signed that declaration, who was a radical leader in Philadelphia, and who, when the war was concluded in 1783, wrote to a friend of his that the American war is over, but this is far from the case with the American Revolution. On the contrary, only the first act of the great drama is at a close. Thank you. The Bob Dylan freaks can go see Bob Dylan. I think he's still on. Also, it's interesting, in Newsweek this week, they have an article about his new $2 million home. And if anybody wants to stay for questions, you can. And if you'd like more information about what we've done in the past and what we're planning for the future, I'll have a sign-up sheet. You could sign up. I'll send you, no strings attached, no money required, some material. If any of you have in your mind a question about being affiliated with a radical subversive organization like this. I know a lot of times people say, if I sign this list, will I get on an FBI list of some kind? Well, there are 70 million fingerprints on file with the FBI now. So I would assume that if you're on this list, you'll eventually get on the FBI list. And if you're not yet, you probably should be, because it's becoming an all-American type thing to do. So don't let that stop you if you want some information. Are there anyone who'd like to leave? Maybe you could. Are there any questions? Does anybody want to sign up? Yeah. Well, now that the bicentennial's over, for us, the bicentennial was always just a context, really, to raise issues in. That's why we got involved in it in 1971. And we have plans already initiated right now. I told you about that ad council campaign to sell capitalism to America. Well, we've developed an alternative campaign. In Hollywood, we've already cut our TV spots as alternative education on the economy. We have radio spots already done, print ads as a direct competition to that. And we're going forward with that campaign. And in fact, we're going into federal court in a week or so to attempt to block the 3 networks from running ad council economic material unless they give equal time to us. That's one thing. We have a number of people who are interested in running around the country, I've run into, interested in running for state legislature on a sort of radical economic platform. State legislatures have always been the dustbin of American politics. I mean, they're a joke. And if you ever sat in on the state legislature, you'd know. I mean, it's just a bunch of turkeys in there. You can't believe it. And they only win because they got a bunch of friends, and relatives who elect them. And I think that you've got a very good chance to get people elected, good people, elected to state legislature who can raise all kind of hell in there and can use that as a forum to discuss economic issues, because state legislatures have tremendous economic power. They're just not using it that much. We're also getting involved in a whole educational campaign moving into schools to offset this Joint Council on Economic Education free enterprise courses. And mostly that kind of groundwork. We're in this for a long time. I mean, everybody realizes it's not going to come in 5 years, you know, it may come in 10 or 15 or 20. And we're just trying to lay groundwork now. Yes?
Do any work like Common Cause?
Not with Common Cause. We have 20,000 members, so dues-paying members, and many of them are in Common Cause. You know, we've never worked officially with them. But for a lot of Common Cause people, we're a little too radical, sort of, you know, a little too out front. A lot of Nader people in PIRGs and, you know, who are a member of Public Citizen and all that, we work with. We've done most of our work with churches, with some labor unions, with groups like that. Yeah, the National Council of Churches, you know, we only go for way out churches. Transcendental Meditationists. No, incidentally, if anybody does TM out there, I just saw a AP blurb. Billy Graham just gave a speech about a week ago. They said that transcendental meditation is the tool of the devil, and that you know, if you actually let everything flow out of your mind, something's going to come into it, and it's probably going to be, you know, some subversive devil stuff. But anyway, the National Council of Churches came to us back in 1973, and you know, they represent thousands and thousands of churches all over the country, and they're a liberal group. You know, they're definitely a liberal church group, very big, and they asked us to develop for them a whole educational campaign for church members, for ministers, for church youth groups for the bicentennial, and we did a whole series of materials for them about the role of the pulpit 200 years ago. The pulpit was, you know, one of the leading revolutionary forces 200 years ago. Ministers thundering about economic and political injustice and tying it in to the teachings in the Old and New Testament. And the National Council has distributed over 75,000 copies of our material to churches around the country. So we've had that, you know, that kind of effect. We've also worked, believe it or not, with the National Campfire Girls. Campfire Girls of America, we developed a whole campaign for them. It was very interesting. It was how Campfire Girls and young people could go out into their community and see how it measures up to the founding principles. You know, look at the tax structure, look at corporations, look at the military-industrial complex, look at, you know, does our community have an aristocracy, that kind of thing. Do you have a question? Let me just get this out for you. Are there any other questions, or? Yes, and then you.
How successful would you say that the People's Bicentennial Commission was?
Well, it's, when you're involved in something like we have been for 5 years, very difficult to determine success because we never had a payoff. We didn't have an election, you know, where you could count the votes. I think that we played a role of some importance over the last 5 years in certainly in our educational campaigns, in reaching schools, in reaching church groups, trade unionists. At the end of, by July 4th, we had over 5,000 school teachers around the country who used our economic and historical material to give, you know, kids an alternative view and an alternative economic approach. And, you know, you can't tell about the success of that because in 5 years or 10 years when they graduate, hopefully they'll have a better, you know, ground of perspective than at least I know I did when I got out of school. And I think we've contributed through our books and materials and demonstrations to something of a debate around alternatives to America's major corporations. I guess the best testimonial, or at least I think a good testimonial to how effective we've been, is that the former president of the Chamber of Commerce, Arch Booth, said that the People's Bicentennial Commission is the most serious and effective anti-big business force in the last quarter century. And I think he gives us too much credit, but I think that at least we've managed to create something of a fear and kept some America's major corporations on their toes. Yes.
I was listening to the Canadian TV over Wednesday, and I can't remember the name of the guy, but he was head of a committee for criminal justice, trying to work for the same thing in Canada, similar to what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't know him. Not at all. We have a number of people in Canada, looking at our stuff, but I don't know him. It's interesting that in many countries in Western Europe, in places like Canada, in places around the world, this whole discussion of, in other places they call it industrial democracy or worker democracy or whatever, is much more developed than in this country. It's much more a part of the political dialogue. Candidates for every office, when they run, have a position on this kind of issue. It's just something that hasn't been discussed yet. And that, see, when you talk about the success, our purpose is to place this issue of democratizing America's economy on the national agenda. Because I firmly believe in the good sense of the American people, and I think that once this issue's out, and once we can begin to debate this issue in public, instead of covering it up and pretending that there's only two economic systems, there's what they got in Russia and there's what we've got here, but there's alternatives to both of those. Once that whole notion is out in the public, then it'll be debated, and I think public support will swing behind it. Yes?
Has the People's Bicentennial Commission received much resistance from big business at all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there a considerable amount, and especially in the last year, because we did a number of things that really got their goat. I told you about those Mobil Oil revelations, about Mobil's role. Well, those were made public by us, and then they were picked up in the New York Times and all that. Mobil Oil has, has held some press conferences about us and so forth, and there's been a lot of pressure. I used to work in the Senate. I worked up there for a year and a half as an aide in Congress, and so I still have contacts there. And a number of people I know have told me that there's been tremendous pressure on a number of senators by corporations and some of their officers to open investigations into the People's Bicentennial Commission. In fact, those investigations were held. Senator Eastland, who's a holdover from the old McCarthy days, is the head of the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee. And Senator Eastland's great. He's one of these guys who thunders about the virtues of the free enterprise system. He has a massive plantations down in Mississippi, where he's from, and they don't grow anything on those plantations. He gets massive government subsidies not to grow things, so that's his version of the free enterprise system. But he held hearings on us, and they amount to 256 pages, and there's some corporate testimony, and they conclude we were un-American, and, all that stuff. So, yeah, there's been resistance. In fact, and Mobil Oil took out an ad that, do you get Parade magazine here? Have you seen that as Sunday newspapers? Parade is in about 150 papers around the country. It's probably, along with Reader's Digest and the National Enquirer, one of the most widely read publications in the country. And Mobil Oil takes out ads every Sunday in Parade magazine. And about 2 months ago, their ad was about the People's Bicentennial Commission and about what a dangerous force we were. And chairman of the board, anybody, well, I doubt there's any major stockholders in here, but if anybody owns Greyhound stock, you would have received a letter in the last couple months. The chairman of the board of Greyhound sent out a letter to 200,000 Greyhound stockholders and all the Greyhound employees, saying that there's this evil force that threatens to, it's very poetic. It was something like, tear down the pillars of our free enterprise system. We're threatening to do that, called the People's Bicentennial Commission. And it's time for Greyhound stockholders to speak up for them and to expose them. And, the American Legion has attempted to, another great catch-22. The American Legion, one of the great defenders of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, their national security chairman sent out messages to all of their, cadre or whatever they call them, their activists around the country, to go into libraries in your community and see if any People's Bicentennial books are in those libraries. We've published 7 books over the last 5 years. And if they're there, don't resort to book burning or anything like that, but these books are so subversive and they're so corrupting of young minds. The American Legion says that you should go to the library and check the books out and never return them, and pay the fine if you have to or whatever. So, you know, there's been a number of different things. Remember that thing about state legislatures? The state legislature of Kentucky passed 2 resolutions one day. One, they condemned us and said that our material should be taken off Kentucky schools and all that. And it was the same day that they passed a resolution making it mandatory in Kentucky for school teachers in grammar school to teach that Eve was literally descended from the rib of Adam. You know, that's how it all began back there. So that must have been an interesting day down at the Kentucky legislature. They're still fighting a monkey trial down there. Do you have one more question?
Yeah, is it possible that this poll you talked about with federal employees was put over national news?
Yeah.
I think I heard it about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, that poll has been out and around. We've conducted it a number of times, you know, with different groups of people. But we, you know, again, in terms of success, we didn't try to operate as a political party or as a highly organized force. We, over the last 5 years, kind of used hit-and-run tactics to, on occasion, be outrageous, to be controversial as hell, to develop different issues. Just so, see, I think the whole country is in a state of psychic numbing. You know, it's sort of zombies sitting around, knowing something's really wrong. I mean, that something has happened, that America used to be better, it used to stand for something different, but no one's really doing anything about what the problem is. Everybody starts sitting around. So we attempted to do a number of things that would just shock the hell out of people. And many of them were very media-oriented, you know, because that's how people get their news. They don't get it, you know, any other way in this country. So that, you know, made national news, and the Mobil Oil stuff. And some of you may have heard during the controversy earlier this year about the revelations of corporate corruption, and you know, it was on Time cover and Newsweek cover, and it was a big deal for a while. It's sort of been forgotten now. Over 100 corporations have confessed to making illegal payments and all that. But we decided that something needed to be done. I mean, now that the issue was out, no one was doing anything. So we held for National Secretaries Week, which was in April, we sent letters. We got a mailing list of the top 10,000 secretaries in America's Fortune 500 firms. 20 secretaries in each firm, you know, the secretary to Harold Janine, you know, president of ITT. And we announced in personal letters to them that in honor of National Secretaries Week, we were offering a $25,000 reward if they would forward to us information that would lead to the arrest, prosecution, conviction, and imprisonment of a major corporate officer in their company for illegal activities. You know, to bring it on to, you know, to get people to wake up to the fact that a little petty gas station holdup gets you 10 to life, and millions of dollars in corporate abuses get you a slap on the wrist. And that created quite a furor, as you can imagine. Also, we got a lot of interesting mail. Anything else? Okay, well, if you'd like to sign up, if I could stay around if anybody has a question and just want to ask me.